Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Brooke Ellison, PhD. She's an associate professor of health policy and medical ethics at Stony Brook University. She has a PhD from Stony Brook University and a master's from Harvard Kennedy School. She is the author of two books, Look Both Ways, 2021, and Miracles Happen in 2002. At age 11, Brooke Ellison was hit by a car, an accident that left her paralyzed from the neck down and ventilator-dependent. 10 years later, she graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University with a degree in cognitive neuroscience. At 23, she wrote Miracles Happen, a memoir that was adapted into a movie, The Brooke Ellison Story, directed by Christopher Reeve. Brooke went on to earn a master's degree in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a PhD in sociology from Stony Brook University. Today, at 42, she is a tenured professor at Stony Brook. In her latest memoir cum sociological analysis, Look Both Ways, Brooke returns to the story of her remarkable life, centering herself in a broader conversation about personal struggle, public policy, and what it means to be human. She reflects upon 31 years as a woman with a ventilator-dependent quadriplegia. She writes frankly about her day-to-day frustrations, but also lyrically about her belief that people possess the strength and grit to fight back when we feel all is lost. I think you are going to love this conversation with Dr. Brooke Ellison. It is really compelling, and she is a phenomenal speaker and puts a lot of heart into everything she says and does. If you're a therapist looking for medical billing services that are ethical and provide excellent customer services, check out www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Its billing service is made by therapists for therapists. All right, let's get to the interview. Okay, welcoming to the Intentional Clinician Podcast, we have Dr. Brooke Ellison, PhD. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Brooke.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Paul, for welcoming me to the show.
Yes, and I am so excited to have you. I've been reading your book, the new one, Look Both Ways, and it is, wow, just so honest and just intelligent and interesting, and I've been loving it. And
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And as I read earlier in the bio, you, of course, did write a book at 23 called Miracles Happen, which was then actually adapted into the movie, The Brooke Ellison Story, directed by Christopher Reeve. This is not your first book, but it's your second book, right? Is it
That's right, my second book, exactly.
And so, yeah, there's so much to talk about. I guess just a little bit about you, even though I've read your bio. You're now as a professor at Stony Brook, and is that the right place? Did I say that right?
That's right. You got it. Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
And we were just talking about how you give lectures quite often to your students, and I guess I was just curious about what it was like for you writing this book, because there's so much in here from your childhood all the way to these experiences you had, almost getting chosen for this White House position, and running for Senate, and all of these things you've done. I was just curious, how was it writing this book?
It was exhausting writing this book. Oh my goodness! Yeah. So thank you again, Paul, for welcoming me to talk about this. Yeah. So as I'm sure you gathered from reading the book, this book means a tremendous amount to me. So I had written, as you mentioned, my first book, Miracles Happen, when I was just 23 years old. So right out of college, 12 years post. Or 13 years, I guess, post the injury that left me paralyzed from my neck down. And even though it was that much time following my injury, I didn't have a full sense of what it meant to be disabled. Like, I'd lived for so long with a disability, but learning to be disabled, I think, is a very different understanding that one has to come to, a self-awareness that I'm not sure that I had. So my first book, as important as it was to me at the time, and even to this day, obviously, was a chronicling, really, of my life from the time of my accident in 1990 to when I graduated from Harvard in 2000, and a really important set of experiences and struggles that my family had that I think was relevant to many people's lives. And after that time, I knew I wanted to write another book. Like, I love to write. I have a love for words, as is probably evident in reading the book.
Oh, yes. I could definitely notice that. No, you're okay. I could definitely notice that you love words. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so that's just like a part of who I am. And so I knew I wanted to write another book. And so I was kind of like dawdling on that for a while, thinking, well, something will strike me for the right tone and the right thing to say at some point, and dilly-dallying a bit. And over the years, I was doing different things. I got my master's degree. I got my PhD. Was running for office, as you mentioned. So my attention was directed elsewhere. It was my 40th birthday. For I guess 6 months preceding my 40th birthday, I was just not feeling well. And I developed a severe pressure ulcer on the top of my left leg. And if you don't know much about pressure ulcers, for people who live with quadriplegia or paralysis of any kind, these are really devastating conditions. They become infected with all sorts of nefarious things and can often cause one's life. Right? It just becomes that debilitating. So for me, I developed a pressure ulcer that was about the size of a human fist. So like 5 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches. It went all the way to my bone, and I was just very, very sick. With Pseudomonas, MRSA, all sorts of infections. And so the wound was treated. And that following summer, I said to myself, okay, you need to get cracking here. You need to, you have some important things to share. You have some important experiences and lessons that you have learned, and ideas that have been so much a part of who you are, that you need to get these things down. So that summer of 2019, actually, I just locked myself away in my bedroom and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I didn't really at first have a sense of where I was going to go. I didn't know if it was going to be like a continuation of Miracles Happen, very kind of autobiographical in nature. And that's kind of how I started it. But then I said, wait a second, like that might not capture some of the really important things that I want to share with people, like my commitment to hope as a construct and what that means to me, what it means to be the child or the person in the family who is disabled, and what it means to make that transition from life without disability to life with disability, what leadership means to me, how I've understood resilience, how I've integrated medical ethics into my professionalism, and how that resonates with experiences that I've had over the years, right? So all of these things I said, are really important to who I am. And if I really want to tell a full story about who I am, all of that needs to be in there. So I just poured my heart out over the span of 3 months. I couldn't believe I got it done in 3 months, but I was, committed to doing that. And that's what I did. So it was exhausting, like I said, and there are many days when I was just like crying as I was writing, but I forced myself to be very introspective and to think about things that I didn't really ever think about before. I didn't have the courage to think about before.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that sounds like quite an outpouring, and I can't believe you actually wrote this. I do believe it, but I also it's quite a book.
Thank you.
And you talk about, the disability, and you mentioned that, and the resiliency and everything you've been through, that you've gone through because of the accident. But it's interesting because when I read the book, and what you say in the book is you didn't want this just to be a book about disability, and it's not. It's just that you talked about how it's humanity touched by disability, like a person that's been affected by disability, and that gives you a unique lens. And you talked about Emily Durkheim, who envisions society that all social experiences and entities can be thought of in terms of the functions they play in overall social structure, the structural functionalist model, and how disability and the role it plays in social life in the U.S. beyond. But you were talking just about all these different things that people deal with when they have a disability, which is praise and ridicule, are revered and repelled, and these like different things you've had to navigate. And also, just interestingly, in the book, you happen to just do so many things in your life that even a person without any disability, not everyone gets around to this, like writing books and becoming a professor and lecturer and doing all the political things you've done and the public speaking. You haven't, the disability has colored your life, but you've been doing all of these things. So the book is about so much more, but yet you've got that unique lens of actually being able to speak about it and in a way that is, helps other people understand and think about how our society should function or how we could have it function. That kind of inclusivity that I was reading about. So
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I was just curious about your comments just about that idea.
All of that. Yeah. No, exactly. So that little bit at the beginning, like I didn't even realize that where I was going with that when I started writing, but it's kind of like, tell me you're a sociologist without telling me you're a sociologist bit there, right? So like that's in there. So I got my PhD in sociology. So there's a lot of that sociological frame to the book, right? I speak very personally as much as I possibly could from a deeply personal standpoint, but didn't want it to be all anecdotal, all from my own vantage point. So I put some structure around it with some talking about society and society's role in understanding disability and how people with disabilities have played this kind of functionalist role in society, right? There's actually like a concept called, the disability crutch, right? That's used, or the narrative crutch that's used in movies, right? So you have the people or the person with a disability, in a film, right? That plays some kind of inspirational role or some kind of person to be pitied, right? So rather than actually understanding a person as a human being, it almost plays this narrative crutch. We see it, in films all over and stories all throughout history, and whether or not the person who has created that character has any idea of what disability is actually like. And I think that, just to a certain extent, I understand that. I understand the viewing of people with disabilities in those lights, in those kinds of descriptors that I talk about in the book as somebody who's either the inspiration or is the person to be pitied, right? The person to be revered or the person to be repelled against, right? These kind of really visceral reactions that we have to disability without really understanding how valuable disability actually is. And this is not something that I ever understood before my accident either, right? So I was only 11 years old at the time of my accident. So just, I guess in fairness to myself, maybe I didn't have enough years under my belt to have known somebody with a disability or to understand it any better than I did. But for all my life until my accident, and then for years after, I kind of understood disability to be that which we pity, right? The part of the human experience that makes us weaker, right? That are the people who can and probably should be marginalized within the world, right? Not included in any way. The ones who are, almost like the forsaken ones. And I remember after my accident thinking that was basically what I should expect for my life. And for a long time, because of that, I did not want to be associated with my disability at all. I thought this is just a part of who I am that I do not want to think about that's going to make me a weaker or a lesser person. And that's not what I wanted for my life. So I had to try to reject this part of my identity that was so much a part of who I was. And it wasn't until years after that I said, wait a second. In my very discussion of my disability, I had to talk about strength. but I had to also talk about the resilience that I needed to rely upon every single day to get through the world, to navigate a world that was not set up for me. I needed to talk about hopefulness and what that means to me and how I view that as a very action-oriented term and so much a part of who I am. I needed to talk about leadership, and I needed to talk about just being able to live the world on my own, in my own way, and the kinds of creativity I needed to adopt in order to do that. And these are all really virtues, right? These are all strengths that I think the world needs much more of. And that is the virtue of disability, right? The real epistemology that one develops by virtue of living with a disability, not all the things that I think we typically understand about disability. So that's kind of what I mean when I mention look both ways, right? Of course, I knew that I was writing a very heavy-hitting book and a very powerful book, and I wanted the title of the book to be equally as heavy-hitting, right? A kind of, no-nonsense title, right? I was hit by a car, and, look both ways. It's almost like a tongue-in-cheek about, what I did not do in preceding my accident, immediately at the time of my accident. But at the same time, it's also how we need to understand our lives. We can't fully appreciate all of what our lives entail without seeing all parts of it. And that includes all the strengths that come out of not just disability, but disability as a manifestation of all the challenges that humanity experiences, right? I think when we experience challenge, we think that it is isolating. We think that it is marginalizing. We think that we are completely alone in the kinds of struggles that we face. But in reality, it's challenges that really unify us, bring us all together. And I think that's a really important understanding for us to have. And disability is just one very obvious representation of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said a lot of really compelling things here, and how you were able to have the strength to live with a disability. You had to examine so many things in your own personal life, but also in society. And then also, just using that as an example of something that can, like you said, can enlighten us or bring us together, and looking at both the difficulties, like you said, look both ways. It was the euphemism, but also I was reading, it's like the sadness, but also the positive lens to view the world. Hey, here's how we can make a better world, right? I can see it now from my vantage point. And I think that was in the middle of the book. I was reading that.
Exactly. Actually, that chapter, the both ways chapter 5, is intentionally the kind of pivot chapter, the transformative chapter, where I go from talking about some of the more personal struggles that I experience, whether it is having to reinterpret the role that I play within my family, or how my experience with disability, I thought, affected my family in possibly one way, when it really may have affected it in an entirely different way, and how it took years after my accident to even force myself to think about that. That was probably the hardest chapter to write. Was chapter 3, where I'm talking about my family. We're talking about how disability has forced people to treat me in a very dismissive or infantilized way. Right? So all of those things take place before chapter 5, and then I have this chapter where I deliberately look in the other direction. So the rest of the book is more focused on the virtues that have come out of the experiences that I've undergone, and how I've chosen to not let the limitations that not only has the physicality of my disability put on my life, but the social constraints that disability has put on my life, and not let those affect me in any way, and the kinds of things I've done irrespective of those, or possibly even because of those.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely was getting that. And I think that is a very important point for people that are interested in reading the book, because I think you hit both sides of it, the personal and kind of the universal. So I really think that I think that people who like I've known some about disabilities just because I've had people in my family that have had profound disabilities, but I haven't known anybody who had been had a quadriplegic disability. I'd not known much about that.
Right. Not that many of us.
Yeah. And so like, I think to me, it was very eye opening, but also just so, interesting about how you were able to view the world and adapt from that viewpoint. And it was actually, the writing was very, I don't know if you meant to do this, but I can like picture, like some books you can picture what's going on and some books you can't. I could picture what was going on in your book.
Thank you.
Very viscerally, which was good. I just was like, wow, this is definitely a movie in my brain.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. Yeah, I did. I very much enjoyed it. And I wanted to talk about, now that we're talking about, you said you deliberately look both ways. I actually wondered about maybe deliberately talking about some of the negative stuff and then talking about some of the positive stuff in the interview. Are you open to that?
Absolutely.
Because some of the negative stuff I wanted to touch on, there's a couple things. Two things that kind of came up. Well, three things. You kind of already mentioned infantilization, but two or three of the things I was thinking about, and you can go with any of these, was the technology is great, but it only brings us so far. You talk about that. And you talk about the billions of dollars in uncompensated care per year that family members, and then the fact that your parents had to fight for basic medical supplies and like they were trying to exclude you from school and all this ridiculous things. So I guess there's three things in there. One is like the technology, because clearly like technology has helped you be able to function and be able to thrive in ways that you wouldn't have been able to before the technology existed. So that's maybe a negative and a positive. But then the family stuff and the insurance companies, those things really got to me. So would any of those you want to tackle? Those are kind of the negative side of it.
Sure. Yes. No. So, yeah. So, like I guess I could start with the first one, the technology, right? So I'm very much of the mind that, and possibly to a ridiculous degree, that anytime I experience challenge, I view it as both a source of struggle, a source of pain, but also an opportunity to do something about something that needs to be fixed, right? So kind of this opportunity statement view of challenge, and technology is no different. So just recently, in addition to my full-time professorship at Stony Brook, I'm also the vice president of technology and innovation for a national nonprofit organization, United Spinal Association. And what I do in this position is liaise with members of big tech and startup companies and engineering, schools of engineering and applied sciences. And then also on the other side, people with spinal cord injuries and wheelchair users, generally speaking, about the challenges that they face, and bringing these two entities together to talk about how technology can be a mechanism to bridge some of the true human rights divides that people with disabilities experience, whether it's their access to education, right? Access to employment. We all know that people with disabilities experience a tremendously high or disproportionately high level of unemployment for a tremendous number of sociological reasons, right? Not just their inability to get to the workplace, but many social structures or social obstacles that impede their ability to get a job. Access to medicine, healthcare, access to community participation, right? All of these things can be addressed by technology that either is or is not innovated, right? So we live in a world where technology is increasingly a part of our daily lives. Much of that is inaccessible to people with disabilities, whether for the cost factor or because it's just not designed for their needs or not designed in the way that's best suited for their needs, or even innovating entirely new technology that would be more usable for them, or to actually provide a solution to a challenge that they may be experiencing, right? So I've taken this question as head on as I possibly could, because technology, you can't sufficiently talk about technology without talking about disability and vice versa. But for a very long time, that was not the case for me. So throughout school, throughout junior high school and high school, I was trying to do things as piecemeal or as Rube Goldberg as I possibly could. I remember using a book stand, just like a regular music stand, to hold my textbooks, and having somebody come and turn the page every time I needed to turn the page. Everything would take so much longer. At the same time, where I am right now in my life is very much the product of the technology that I was able to integrate into it. So now I'm trying to create for whoever is going to follow in my wake a world that's much more accessible to them, that provides them the equal opportunity to compete and use their talents. Right, that they have the world open to them, and the world can see how tremendously brilliant and talented people with disabilities are, and how they can contribute to a functioning society, right? I think that these are virtues that are just not often included in our conversation, actually so much so that one of the courses that I teach at Stony Brook is a course called Inclusion in Innovation, and I teach future engineers or engineering students about how to integrate disability inclusion in their future work. And one of the technologies that the students were working on was a device that would allow people with quadriplegia to take part in art, right? To allow them to paint or to manipulate art on the computer. And I said, this is so valuable, because art is a representation of how people see the world, and art has historically been missing the disabled vantage point, right? People with disabilities view the world in a very particular way, and everybody is being denied an opportunity to see how people with disabilities really understand and view the world differently. So I think that, technology is no different from that. So that's a little bit about kind of my experience in the technology and why I think it's so important. So the inaccessibility that technology has often had, I'm trying to address it as proactive a way as I possibly can.
Yes, I think that's a very great summary on both ends of it. I think it's very important like the art thing. I had not thought of that. That is, obviously that is amazing. And it's also good for your mental health to be able to express yourself via art, and how much could be created. And I think what you're nailing here is something that's come up multiple times in the book and in my mind, is that there's this sort of assumption people without a disability might accidentally make putting it onto a person with a disability. They might just assume something because you're relying on, a wheelchair or technology or something to help you, that you don't have things to contribute to society or to art or to whatever. And I think that is the real annoyance, and
that's
could be
exactly right.
travesty, or, depending. In your case, obviously you fought to be able to have a voice and to be able to use it. And there's so many people out there with disabilities right now that, have no platform and are sort of like treated like children,
Exactly,
and I think that is, I'll tell a little personal. I was going to I guess I'll bring this in before I ask you the next question, but I had an uncle who was also hit by a car.
Oh, wow.
He did not have quadriplegia, but he almost died multiple times, and he could really not walk without. He couldn't really walk. I'll put it that way. He kind of had to use a wheelchair for most things, but he could kind of hobble, like one of his legs kind of worked, So he didn't have the spine, but he had a curved spine. He couldn't, so he could move around with great difficulty. Take him hours to go anywhere, right? And he had to kind of be assisted. And it was funny because, he had problems talking. Talking and everything was affected. Basically, he could barely live on his own. Only a little bit. He could live with some assistance. And I thought about, when I was reading your book, and about how how much you've overcome and how you're like inspiring people, like literally with your books and your movies and your lectures and everything. And that's phenomenal. But I remember thinking about him, and I thought about when you talk about people infantilizing you because you couldn't move without the assistance of technology. And I thought about him too, like people infantilized him just because he had to have a wheelchair to get on the bus and move around with, a double cane and a walker and, all these things. But then I thought about, in his personality, which is different, than yours, but he was the one everyone wanted to talk to because he had been through so much terrible crap that he ended up being the most mature uncle or aunt that I've had pretty much in my life. He'd give you the best advice. It took him a longer time to talk because he'd stutter, over his words, but he gave you the best advice. He would always listen. He never said he didn't have time for you. And I thought about that, how people would assume, oh, he just needs help or something. And it's like, no, he's helping you, just by talking to you. Just because he can't pick up your groceries or help you with physical labor doesn't mean that he's not helpful, right? So I thought about that, and I was kind of comparing him in my mind to you because the only other person I've known that has been very severely unable to move without assistance. And I thought about, yeah, you're welcome. And I feel like that is the thing, is that as a society, technology is great to help people be able to move and do things they need to be able to do despite their limitations. But I think that as a society, we need to be listening to people who have had disabilities because they have a different perspective, like you said. But also, I don't know, I feel like it does something to you as a person, or can. And not that this is a stereotype, but it can really open you up to the pain of other people and to be able to understand them. That's a theory I had.
I couldn't agree more strongly with you, Paul. And thank you so much for your candor and your willingness to open up and share that, because you're exactly right. Our inclination is to dismiss somebody with a disability, right? We typically use our standards of beauty and physicality, right? We have a society that's so much built on virility and physical beauty, meeting some kind of idealized standard, right? This is just how we've structured our society. And people with disabilities, as a result of that, have been the lowest on the totem pole because they are the ones who are most often not meeting those ideals, or coming farthest to meeting those ideals. So they're ranked lowest on the societal totem pole, even so much so as during the pandemic, right? There are many people with disabilities who were the first to not receive care when care was being triaged, right? The relative worth of their lives was being reduced or thought to be not as worthy as others. And that was extremely detrimental, but very reflective of how we value the lives of people with disabilities. And you think that your children are infantilized or not, you're just not worth the investment that we make in other people. When I think that is such an unfortunate way of looking at the situation, for the very reason that you mentioned, right? Your uncle, I would venture to guess, purely because of the circumstances he encountered and the kinds of understandings that he had to incorporate into his life, viewed the world very differently. And I talk about this in the book, that my life is limited in terms of breadth of experience, but each experience is so much deeper. Right, I don't have some of the typical relationships that people have in their lives, right? Some of the rites of passages that people experience, but the relationships that I do have are profoundly important, right? Are just so deeply important to who I am. Right, I might tire more easily, but I invest so much in every moment that I am, awake and doing the work that I do. I could spend hours in front of the computer doing the kinds of things that I need to do in order to get my work done, because you have to live life differently. And it is a valuable life, a really important way to live to live your life. So just last week, it was a particularly warm day here in New York, and I went with my nephews to the beach. And I talk about the beach now. I take my nephews to the beach. In the book, and yes, my oldest nephew is 7 years old, and he was playing on the playground, the swing set, and I couldn't get over to where he was because it was covered in sand. So he came running over, and his friend came running behind him, and he said, "Oh, Carter, you're not leaving, are you?" And he said, "No, I just wanted to say hello to my Brookie. She can't get over here to the sand." And he understands the value that I've played in his life and the role that I played in his life, because it's so different than any other relationship that he has. And I think that there's something really valuable to be found there. And even though relationships are different, or the kinds of ways you interact with somebody with a disability is different, there's something really valuable to be found there. And unless you take the time to know that, you will never know it. And I think that is not only to the detriment of the person who lives with the disability, but to the other person as well.
Oh, yes, I agree. Yeah, this is a very great way to summarize that. I agree. I think you're right. The other people, is a detriment to them too, not to open up and to grow past whatever strange, there's also I think this is just a theory. I think people without a major disability might be scared of somebody who has a disability, because they think, what if that, I don't know how to cope with that. And should I just give them pity, or what if I had that disability? You start thinking about all those things. And I think it takes bravery for the person who is having the disability to put up with all that. But I also think it takes bravery of the person who's unintroduced to say, what about just treating them like a regular person and seeing what their limitations are, asking them, what are your boundaries, right?
Exactly.
Versus just assuming that you have all these boundaries. Because as far as I can tell, while it takes you longer, you go travel, you go places, you do things, you make speeches, you talk about. What I mean by taking longer is it just takes you longer than a person who is able to walk around, and you deal with that. And exactly. I think, as a person who can walk around, it's like, let's give that person the humanity that they deserve instead of kind of categorizing them. Right. And I think that's something that comes through in the book. Yeah, you're welcome.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you can't fault people necessarily, right? You can fault them to a certain extent, but we don't live in a society that teaches people what the virtue of disability, or really disability in any way, shape, or form. I know that was not a lesson that I ever had growing up as a child. I didn't really have that level of exposure. And because we don't live in a society where there are people with disabilities who are more visible in different societal roles, there's no role model to look up to, right? Just say, okay, we can have a CEO or a person, a legislator who has a disability, and that is just fine. That is to be expected, right? We're taught the opposite, right? These people, you belong in nursing homes or health or medical institutions, or kind of removed from society, living in their homes and not going anywhere, right? That's kind of how disability is often portrayed, right? The people to be shunned, the people to be embarrassed about. And unless we do a better job in putting people with disabilities in all of these different positions of power, or positions of influence, or even just welcoming them to the decision-making table, that's going to be, I think, an unfortunate stereotype associated with disability for far longer than it ought to be.
Yes, I definitely agree. I want to hit on one more negative thing before we start talking about some positive things.
Sure, no, of
course. which is you were talking about in the United States that the care for people of those, family members who have someone in their family who's disabled, in certain countries, and in most industrial countries, that person is able to be compensated for their work. But in the US, it's very difficult to be able to be compensated as a family member to help your fellow family member who may be needing extra help. And in fact, you said, and this a statistic was billions of dollars in uncompensated care each year in the United States.
Right, hundreds of billions.
Hundreds of billions. Okay, of people caring for people with disabilities. And in other industrial nations, this is not necessarily the case. It's a lot easier to get a position doing that. So I don't know.
Right.
You talked about the Caregiver Action Network and the National Alliance of Caregiving and Evercare, but can you just maybe comment on what's going on with that?
Sure. So there has been movement at the certain state levels, at the state level, to try to compensate family caregivers for the care that they give to their family members. But by and large, just as I had written in the book, a tremendous amount of care for people like me, or for parents, elderly parents who may need additional care, or for your children who have no other ability but to rely on their parents for care. The care that is given through family members, often through mothers who, in my case, like the day of my accident was also my mother's first day as a special education teacher. It was also her last day. She had to leave her job, a job that she worked very hard to get. She had done when I was a child. She went to school after we had become old enough. My sister, my brother, and I became old enough to kind of fend for ourselves a little bit more independently. She went back to school to get her teaching license and then her degree in special education. So she had started her career, but then had to leave that, putting my family in kind of some financially difficult waters for a while in order to care for me, because getting reliable, skilled care for somebody like me is extremely difficult to do, right? And right now, given the nursing shortage, is even worse. There is a tremendous shortage of home care providers in general. The reimbursement rate is abysmally low for home care providers, and then there's no legislation that has been enacted at the federal level to allow family members who are providing this care to get reimbursed or compensated really in any way. So they do this on an uncompensated basis, costing or saving, our country hundreds of billions of dollars. And, that's just fundamentally unfair. It's just not right. So we need to have much more work being done in this area. Actually, there was just some movement at the federal level by the Biden administration to look at the caregiver problem and how we need to address this, from a proactive policy standpoint, because people's lives are at risk as a result, nothing short of that. And that's how many people who live in situations like my own end up in medical institutions, right? That becomes almost the expected outcome for their lives, and that is completely unacceptable, right? That somebody, because they've had an injury, ends up living in some kind of really potentially catastrophic medical institution, right? We saw during the pandemic how challenging these institutions are in people's lives. There's a lack of care that's provided there, right? Not enough people to take on the caseload, so much so that there's the spread of infection and disease, and they become weakened as a result. And things like pandemics can become just devastating to that population as a result. So there's just many different social outcomes that are should be thought of as completely unacceptable, but because they're focused on a population that doesn't really garner too much respect, we deal with it, we tolerate it, and that's not something that I want to see in the world. So I continue to advocate for all changes in all of these different policy areas, because they can be changed if we just have a voice at the table and take action on them.
That's a very good point. I mean, yeah. I have no summary except to say that can move us towards maybe action, or maybe some of the positive things.
Exactly.
Bringing awareness to it, which is what you're doing with this book. And, that's why we're publishing the podcast. Now, there are some interesting psychological things you were talking about in the book. I believe, if I can find it, I think this was, you were talking about David Foster Wallace. And you were talking about the difference between what we want and what we need, human needs, not special needs. And I was just curious if you were maybe some of the things you learned about this. I mean, there's a lot of philosophy you quote in here, but some of the things you learned between, wants and needs. I thought that was maybe something that was universally appealing.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that was the very first part of the book that I wrote. I actually wrote that as an independent essay, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do about it. So happens at the end of chapter 4, where I was talking about infantilization and kind of the marginalization that people with disabilities often face. And I wrote this essay at a time of kind of some emotional weakness, right? I was feeling sad about things I wanted to do, I felt that life was denying me the opportunity to do, whether that was going on a vacation or availing myself of the kinds of relationships that many people find as critical in their lives. So all of these things were kind of flooding my head in terms of how could I go on with my life without being able to do these kinds of things? So I forced myself to be very particular about what I was feeling and what I was thinking about. So I have this kind of wants and needs section to culminate chapter 4. I just stuck it in there because I thought it's just a valuable place to have it go. There's something that I want people to know about me, right? That's kind of that's the nexus that I draw between how people typically or could conceivably treat me as, almost like somebody who doesn't have much value in the world, to somebody who is very much human, who has this very same human wants and needs as everybody else. And the kinds of needs that I experience are pretty significant. Right? The things that I need to get through the day are significant, but they're very much, at this point, circumscribed to my daily getting through the day, right? The kinds of physical needs that I have, right? Medical needs that I have. I think up before my accident, I would have never been able to conceive of my life without having the ability to do the things that I had done when I was a child, right? So you don't need to be able to even breathe or walk down the street in order to live a meaningful life. You don't need to be able to go on vacation to live a very meaningful and powerful life. You don't need to be fully independent to live a life that is of value. And I think I would never have understood that as a child. I probably would never have understood it even as an adult. That I think that we ascribe certain needs to who we are and to our lives because we think that those are the things that give our lives value, when they don't necessarily, right? I still have the same wants. I still would love to do those things. Yes, I'm not ignorant as far as that's concerned, right? These things would make my life, richer, but at the same time, there are other things that I can do that make my life equally as rich. So I teach a course on medical ethics, and you would talk a lot about kind of the lives that people with disabilities experience, or some of the circumstances that bring about disability, and how people have decided to end their lives, right? The kind of physician-aided dying or physician-assisted suicide, as it's kind of more often described, right? So how people decide to end their lives because of some kind of devastating disease or disability that they might encounter. So whenever we have this lecture, I ask my students, well, what would constitute a life not worth living for you? And they often talk about things like, oh, if I wasn't able to play soccer, if I wasn't able to live independently, or if I was living on a was attached to tubes or attached to machines, or if I was a burden to my family, right? So all of these things that I think people typically view as completely devastating to their lives, or would be I guess, game changers in terms of whether or not they would want to continue to live their lives. And then throughout the course of the semester, they see things a little bit differently. That, wait a second, you actually can do things that are meaningful and important and live life in a valuable way without those things. It doesn't mean that you don't, you have the same desires that other people have, and you can do things that are quite meaningful and quite powerful. And I think that we see these social representations of life otherwise very frequently. So you could think of movies like $1 Million Baby, where it was the logical outcome and the logical decision that after experiencing a paralyzing injury, that the protagonist of the movie would choose to end her life, or like Me Before You, right? Another movie that portrays the very same idea. And I think that is just catastrophically unfair. I think it portrays a very unfortunate vision of what it's like to live with a disability, and without understanding the humanity behind it, right? That I, from my own vantage point, somebody who would desperately want to do all of these things that give people's lives richness and color, but we create a world that doesn't allow us to do these kinds of things. But at the same time, you can live a life that's meaningful and powerful and worth it without those things.
That is I'm very glad you're talking about that. I think it's important because I think what you're teaching them is so many things, but one of the things I'm getting is empathy, in the sense that you're able not to have pity, but empathy, which is, I want to be able to learn how you view the world, and I want to be able to feel how you feel, and I want to be able to see things through your lens. Mm-hmm. And I think if you can do that, it's a very amazing exercise for young people. It's for anybody, really. I think we could use more of it in the world, but
thank you. And not assuming that lens is a lesser lens, right? I think we assume that to be the case, right? That somebody who's not living in a situation that we are familiar with or accustomed to is almost by definition living some kind of inferior version of what we understand humanity to be. And I think that's an unfair assumption to make.
It's just yes, exactly. It's just a different lens, and it's an altered lens, and it has it. And so I think you have to overcome all the psychological difficulties that you've talked about in the book to be able to make meaning and not dwell in some of the more negative aspects of what's going on. And you have made great meaning, and that takes a lot of inner mental strength and spiritual strength, so to speak. So I think you're welcome. And I think that should be an inspiration, because I think a lot of people, commit suicide every year because they say, I can't live with this thing that happened to me or my family or somebody in my life. And I think that's so tragic because, like you talked about in the movies, but I feel like that's so tragic because you're right. Right now, it is feeling like you can't live through that thing. It is feeling the feelings and the emotions that are attached to something bad or devastating that happens to you or your family. What will make you feel like a part of you is dying. And in fact, a part of you probably is dying.
Exactly right. Yeah. But, I don't want to minimize that at all.
But the idea that suicide is some sort of solution when things don't go your right is something I think that we've got to keep continuing to downplay and say, no, there is value in life at any with any disability or any restraint, or even after trauma or something that happens. And I think you're a testament to all that, because I do see the car accident is extremely traumatic, and you talk about in the book for you, and especially because you were unconscious for days, for your family while you were unconscious, and everything they went through too, and then the disability and learning to live with that, and how all of that affected you is traumatic. And I think that you've chosen, and I think I'm using the word chosen because I don't think it was easy. I don't think you just we're like, okay, this is easy, let's just do this. I think you chose to make your life meaningful, and you chose to inspire others and engage in the conversation. And so that is a huge inspiration for people wherever they are, even if they don't have any sort of notable physical disability. If you have a mental disability, right, or a mental illness, that your voice is not valuable, it's not true. It is valuable. It's just that, you're struggling with things that others may not be struggling with. And so in your case, I think as a mental health person, I was thinking, my goodness, not only are you every day physically having to, navigate, and now maybe as you're older, it might be easier for you because you're used to it or something, but I don't see it as easy. I don't know. It doesn't look easy to me. I'm not sure.
Right.
But I feel
no, exactly. It isn't. You're exactly right. And I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. One of the, I think, the important understandings that I had come to that was critical to making that transition from kind of the difficulty in life to forging ahead was to be able to separate my disability from the trauma that presented the disability, right? Like I think very often when we experience some kind of life-altering or traumatic experience, we can't understand our lives outside of the trauma that created whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, right? So it took me a very long time for me to be able to understand my disability separate from the accident and the trauma associated with the accident that created the disability, right? So I needed to understand these things as separate, right? So I could for a very long time could only like curse my disability and like understand and be terrified of it because I associated it almost entirely, almost synonymously with the accident that devastated my life, that caused so much pain and injury and changed things so dramatically. I needed to be able to shift that. I needed to not be afraid of my disability because I was so upset about thinking about my accident. So that making that transition and understanding these two things as fundamentally separate, I think was really an important thing for me. And then that allowed me to move ahead with my life saying, okay, this was a traumatic instance, but my life thereafter is not just a continuation of that trauma, right? My life, my accident was tragic, but my life is not a tragedy. My accident was traumatic, but my life is not a continual instance of trauma, and I can do what I want with it and make it what I want to make of it, as long as I have the supports around me to do it. And that was a really important transition for me to make, to say, okay, I can do these two things as separate. That required a lot of rewriting of a personal narrative, right, in terms that were not frightening to me. Up until the time I went away to college, I didn't ever talk about my accident because it was so devastating to me. It was so terrifying. And I just if anybody were to ask me about my accident, it was just something that wasn't done. It was almost like, don't talk about this because it's the unspoken thing. And I think that was probably detrimental to me because it didn't allow me to process and almost reconstruct and reorganize a devastating experience in ways that were in terms that I could handle and manage. It wasn't until I got to college where I was forced to talk about my accident in a way that didn't make me break down into tears, but allowed me to talk about the things that I had to actually on a similar scale integrate into my life, all these strengths and virtues, the things that we were talking about before. That is actually who I am. I'm not the definition. I'm not just the embodiment of tragedy. I'm the embodiment of the strengths that required to overcome the trauma that created the disability in and of itself. And those two things sit side by side. You cannot separate the two. Those are the things that are inseparable, not trauma and disability. It's trauma and resilience. You can't really have one without the other and then move forward with your life.
Wow. Yes, that's inspirational. And I think that, one of my big things I work on as a therapist and as a supervisor is people recovering from all types of trauma, right? A lot of the trauma is mental, but a lot of it's also physical, So in your case, I was just thinking it's what you just said, but I'm summarizing was not only was it physical and life altering, it was also mental. And you had to get to a point where you were able to separate and to say, my life is not a tragedy. That was a traumatic incident, but I'm going to continue on here and make my life what I can do with my life as the best I can. I want to talk about a few positive things here because we got a little bit of time left before the interview is over, but I don't want to spoil the whole book, which is why I've not brought up every chapter, because I want people to buy the book and read it.
Thank you.
I was curious, are you going to is this going to be an audiobook too, or is it just paper and ebook right now?
Yes, I'm working on getting it made into an audiobook as well. I've loved audiobooks for actually as long as I've lived with quadriplegia. Yeah, that's kind of one aspect of technology that has been so effective for me since I was a kid. I remember listening literally to my textbooks on audio cassette, which, like, my gosh, that doesn't put you to sleep. I don't know what does, but right. No, so I've listened to audiobooks for years. So I'm tremendously so the beneficiary of that technology. So I want to give back to that. And then also I want it to be as accessible to as broad an audience as I possibly can. So working on getting that done. Absolutely.
Oh, that's great. I'm excited about that because I love audiobooks as well, just for many other reasons, because, my personal reasons, but I love both. But
sure.
so I wanted to talk about this, maybe, I don't know. I feel like you talk a ton about hope and things you've been pushing for, and you've been involved in quite a lot of amazing projects and undertakings. Oh yeah, absolutely. But I loved your speech that you made on your 40th birthday.
Thank you.
I was wondering if I could read the end of it.
Sure, absolutely,
okay?
Absolutely.
So I don't want. There's a lot of personal details in here, but I guess I was just going to talk about what you said to your friends, because this is what you said to your friends at the end. This is several pages, just for the listeners to know. This is not the whole speech. It's just the last.
It's copied verbatim. Actually, I just literally took the text that I had written and stuck it in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can read the whole speech when you buy the book, but let's just go with this. At the end, it says, "If you know anything else about me, you also know I love science. And in many ways," because you had just been talking about how you had been so happy that they'd all been there for you and you've been there for them, and your life wouldn't be complete without them. But I didn't want to summarize all that. But if you know anything else about me, you also know that I love science and in many ways dedicate my life to it. Science is rational. Science explains the seemingly inexplicable. I could say that. Science explains the seemingly inexplicable. Science can measure the seemingly immeasurable. But one thing that science has not been able to rationalize, explain, or measure is love. Thank you all for teaching me what science cannot, that the finite space in my heart can hold an infinite amount of love. And I just think that's so inspirational, coming from a person who is a science teacher and is in love with science, to talk about love. And you do talk about love in various parts of the book, but I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about what your friends and love and all of these things mean to you.
Oh my goodness, thank you. So if I love to talk about anything, I love to talk about my friends. My goodness, it's interesting. So as you know, I love my birthday. This past year, my birthday's in October 20th. This past year, I had planned a little birthday get together. It was going to be the first time since the pandemic, but I wasn't able to do it. So I rescheduled it for my half birthday, which is actually tomorrow. So it's going to be exactly. Nice. I'm just going to do it this weekend, so April 22nd, and I have my friends coming, and I have the theme of my course. I always do a theme to my birthday because it happens around Halloween. I wanted this year to be superheroes, and I told them that I wanted to be that because they are the superheroes in my life. They're the ones who bring me forward and carry me through my times of struggle every year. Day in and day out, they are my heroes. Yeah, anytime I give a speech and I'm asked who my heroes are, I say without any moment's hesitation that it's my friends, that they are the people who I ascribe to be, who I would love to be. They're the people who give me hope and give me inspiration on a daily basis. So I have nothing but infinite love for my friends. I remember after my accident being afraid that I would not be able to have friends. Again, kind of falling into that mindset, the disabled person mindset, that it's not somebody that anybody would want to have in their lives, that I didn't have anything to add to anybody else's life, and anybody who would be friends with me would just be doing it out of pity or out of charity. And that, I think, was an unfair assumption for me to make for myself, and really an unfair assumption for me to make to other people as well, right? Kind of giving them the minimal amount of credibility or respect or credit in any way. So my friends mean absolutely everything to me. So many of the ones who I was paying tribute to for my 40th birthday are also going to be here at my house. Again, we're going to do the superhero theme, and we're going to just see each other. And I haven't seen many of them since before the pandemic, and they've given me inspiration on a daily basis. They remind me of what it means to have fun and to they are the most obvious manifestation of love in my life, and I know that I would not be who I am today were it not for their presence in my life and the person they have forced me to become, right? The person who they have told me I can be and allowed me to be, as silly and as irreverent as I can sometimes be. They give my life all the richness and all the color that I could possibly ask for, and I feel nothing but tremendous gratitude for everything that they do in my life, and the role that they play in my life. And I planned, when I see them, to share that little book, a bit about the book in a speech, like I love to give speeches to. So that's I do that at my 40th birthday party. I'm going to do the same thing. This next little get together, I'm going to share that part of the I Love chapter, where I talk about my friends and how much I love them and what they mean to me, and how I would not be who I am were it not for them. And I tell them that all the time. I am not hesitant at all to tell them how much I love them and why it's important to let them know that.
I'm very happy that you're getting to celebrate your half birthday this week, and that's wonderful. That's wonderful, and all your friends, and it's true. I mean, that you went through all those thoughts about who would want to be a friend, and I just think, like, you talk about being sensitive in the book, or people labeling you that way, and I think everyone has value, and the fact that I get it, when you're younger, when you had the trauma, it's like, who wants to be friends, or like, how is this going to work dynamically? And it is working, and you are connected to so many people, and I think help people, and that's, I think that's a huge word, that I felt throughout the book. I don't think you really said that, but I was interpreting it as a therapist, thinking how you've helped people, but you may not even realize you're helping them, just even the lecturing and the teaching. Yeah, absolutely. So, I think,
forget. I know it, but I forget it.
Because I don't think you. I was trying to read. I need to read through it, but I don't remember you saying, like, "Oh, I help people." Like, I don't see that in here, but I feel like you are. It was just evident. Maybe you weren't giving yourself credit.
Thank you. I guess I thought, and I do. I guess these view it as a bit presumptuous. Like, are people looking for my help? Would I be presumptuous to say that? But I know that my life has a level of humanity and depth and obvious sorrow and tragedy built into it that people can resonate with and draw parallels in their own life as a result of. And I find that as painful as those experiences have been, I find that to be a blessing, really, to be able to interact with and connect with people on such a deep level, right? On the kinds of things that people sometimes feel shameful about or feel like make their lives more difficult, have been these instances of tremendous beauty and just great hope and brilliance for me, and I think ultimately for them as well. Like that's a tremendous gift that I never would have anticipated for my life.
That is great, and I think that as I'm glad we've talked about this in the podcast, because I really want people out there who have gone through trauma to be able to hear you as an example of somebody who really invests themselves in their friendship and goes deep. And I think when you've gone through something so difficult and life-threatening, I think it opens you up to the abilities to go deeper faster. That's just a theory I have.
Yeah,
I mean, not everybody has it, but go ahead. What's that?
My friendships are intense. Like for sure. Like my friends are like, they mean everything to me. And I think that the reverse is the case. Like there's not somebody like there's not somebody who I'm just like kind of friends with, right? Like people who I'm friends with, they're the backbone of who I am. And, yeah, so I think like some of the romantic love that people often assume will play that role in their lives, the kind of that foundational backbone kind of relationship in their lives, the things that they need in order to get from one part of their lives to another, like that has been borne out on the shoulders and through the love of my friends. And like I think that we as a society don't value that nearly often enough, that there are many ways to craft relationships so that we live in a well-supported, kind of well-adapted way, and that's been how I've lived my life. And I couldn't imagine living my life without their presence in my life.
Yes, that is incredible, and I want to make sure we're almost out of time. I want to make sure we wrap it. I feel like I wanted to make a point here because earlier, what you saying all this, and from a mental health clinician standpoint, friends and supportive family, I'll put that out.
Right, and adult family, yeah.
Supportive family are so helpful for mental health that people don't even realize it's the water they're swimming in. But you do realize it because of I think you've been through so much, and you've have these rich, deep relationships, and that is something that anytime I meet somebody with a mental health issue, almost always they have had a problem with their friends or family, or they've been isolated from their friends or family, or they've had diminished contact with people that they feel are good friends, or like, I'll qualify that again, supportive friends or supportive family. They didn't feel that, and thus their mental health deteriorated.
I could say, I mean, during the pandemic, that was extremely detrimental to me, extremely impactful, and it had a visceral effect on me when I wasn't able to see my friends, right? Because like that's such an important presence in my life.
Yes, and I was thinking about how you said earlier how you are able to live with help, but you have your own place. You have like the one house you're in, and then you have the other condo or house or something on Long Island. And then I was just thinking about how you were talking about a lot of people with disabilities are like put in these medical institutions or like half kind of skilled care facilities that are not very good for them. And I thought about that because like then it's like you don't have that. I mean, you have people around you, but you don't have your community. And I think that is detrimental to their care and their well-being.
Yeah, I mean, there's been probably what's more widely publicized or talked about is like this aging in place movement, right? So people, as they age, you want them to be able to live with the community. The very same idea and the very same need is in place for people with disabilities, right? Like, how do we build a world so that people with disabilities can live amongst their friends, among their family, right? So they don't have to rely on family members who may or may not exist, or who may or may not have the ability to leave their jobs in order to care for them, right? Like, how do we build a world so that people with disabilities can be as fully a part of the community as everybody else, fully participatory, able to offer their insights and their talents and their the skills that they have, so they can just be an obvious presence in the world. And this is going to require policy change on so many different levels, whether it's from a healthcare standpoint, right? the increased number of healthcare providers that we need in order to make this a possibility, getting more people with disabilities employed so they have the income that they need, so they can live at home or pay people on their own to provide care for them, building more homes that are accessible to people, right? All of these different kinds of sociocultural factors need to be taken into account, so we can do that very thing so that people with disabilities can be a part of their community, can gain from those around them, and then in turn people around them can gain from them, right? There's all this fully circular relationship that needs to be understood and then ultimately acted upon so that everybody is better off. And it's something that can be done, right? It's not difficult, right? We're landing, rovers on the moon, right? We're splitting atoms and doing all sorts of things that are way more difficult than you're just creating a world that thinks about disability for more than just a fraction of a second. And we don't think about people with disabilities for more than that amount of time because of these things that we've talked about, right? This uncertainty, this fear, this unwillingness to want to talk to a person who may remind us of our own vulnerability, right? All of these things are just our understanding of people with disabilities as being less worthy than other people. And so we legislate accordingly, right? All of these things have created a world that I think does everybody a disservice, and is something that we could easily deconstruct and reconstruct. We just took the time to do it.
I agree. So that kind of brings us to kind of like, where can listeners get involved? Kind of like a send off, like, if listeners, and now I'm gonna talk, your book and your website and everything is going to be in the show notes, so we're going to talk about that too. But how can people get in? Oh, yeah, absolutely. How can people get involved with helping disability on a policy level, or even like on a city level, or a national level? What are some organizations you recommend that we get involved with?
Right. So there are many different kind of disability specific organizations, whether that is something like United Spinal, right, that caters to the needs of people with spinal cord injuries, or ones that are similarly structured around autism or blindness or deafness, right? There are many of those. It doesn't take much effort to just find ones that are local to you, or ones that are on a national scale. But then also, right, I think we typically look at disability based on like the actual disability itself, right, the actual condition, right? So kind of almost like a medical way of looking at disability, rather than the kinds of socio-political and justice-based challenges that disability creates, right? So like looking at it from the other vantage point, right? So what are the challenges that disability is potentially creating for somebody that we could address, right? Like whether it's an access issue, whether it's an economic justice related issue, right? So people can get involved based on a particular disability or on an access or justice related issue, right? So like people work in workplaces, right? We should not stand for a level of inaccessibility or lack of representation of people with disabilities in our workplace, right? We can talk about those things as well, right? You can be activist on those kinds of fronts as well, not necessarily tying yourself to a specific cause or a specific disability, but like we as people without disabilities care equally as much about making sure that our workplaces and our schools and our parks and open land are accessible to people with disabilities, just like they're accessible to everybody else. We want to make sure that our jobs are accessible. We want to make sure that our media representation of disability is what it ought to be, right? Not just the simplistic stereotyped vision, but actually give people who are just going about their lives. You're represented as 15% of the characters in movies and on television shows, just as they are, in the world. And all of these things I think are really important, as are befriending somebody with a disability, right? Welcoming them into your own circle, and you're not feeling like your circle is going to be weakened, but instead strengthened by their presence in it, right? I think all of these things operate on various fronts, and you're talking to your legislators and like making sure that policies that we enact are actually inclusive of people with disabilities. I think we tend to understand disability policy as almost a standalone issue which has, I think, unfortunately been looked at as almost reactionary or an afterthought, right? We construct these policies that affect everybody else, and then we're going to do this other kind of side act for people with disabilities, rather than thinking about like policy across that's fully inclusive, that involves people with disabilities right from the get-go, whether it's how we enact the infrastructure bill and the kinds of transportation changes that we're going to make so that the world is going to operate better, right? Like, how do we include people with disabilities from the get-go into this conversation? Same thing with health policy or with employment policy or education policies. Like, where do we start right from the get-go so that everybody is included, rather than thought of as an afterthought that we can or cannot choose to think about? Like, all of these things, I think, they can't be shouldered completely alone by people with disabilities on their own, right? It's going to require some allyship, and it's going to require some voicing of concerns and your desires of inclusion among people who don't live with disability, at least not on a visible basis. So these are the real proactive ways that are going to make a difference and make sure that people with disabilities are a part of society in the way that they should be.
Well, I think that's a great summary. So I think whatever your passion is, as the listeners are out there, and any specific disability, or just getting involved in local, even just like building and technology help, or joining on the federal level and lobbying that we don't just have tertiary bills, but we have this included in all the language, along with all the other, diversity and inclusion elements. That a lot of people are pushing, that we should be including everybody in that. So I think that's a good start. And I am going to encourage people to check out all of your stuff that you've got to offer, including your book.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The movie that you worked on with Christopher Reeve, and your first book as well. I mean, why not?
But
we'll start with this one. Yeah, we'll start with the current one, Look Both Ways, by Dr. Brooke Ellison. And is there any sort of send-off message you wanted to say, or have we covered everything?
Oh, gosh, no, thank you. Thank you for all of you who are listening and taking the time to get to this point. And I hope that you have found something that resonates with you in this conversation today. And that disability really is a part of all of our lives, right? It's not something that we have the liberty to just think about or choose not to think about. It's a part of humanity, and it is equally a social issue as it is a physical issue. And the fact that you have taken the time to listen, it makes me vastly encouraged about how change can happen, and to never underestimate the role that you play individually in how change actually ultimately happens. So thank you, Paul, for this time today.
Absolutely, and thank you, Brooke.
You won't find it by yourself. You're gonna need some help, and you won't fail with me around. Come on, let's go. I will tell you if you change.
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician Podcast. If you're enjoying this show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. Or take just a minute to give us a rating on iTunes. As most of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. My colleagues and I have started a nonprofit called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they act violently. It is a bold effort to save lives and curb violence by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website, www.violencepreventionhotline.org. Join us online by signing our petition on the website, sharing the website with your network of people, donating to the cause if you like, and you can now even write your congressperson from our website with a simple form. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you are a therapist looking for ethical and excellent medical billing services, check out therapistbillingservicesllc.com. That's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Billing services created by therapists for therapists. If you're looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can provide you the 20 hours you need to become EMDRIA certified. I have groups online and in person, and I do individual consultation. Just send me a message at the website and I'll get back to you. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, check out the great training opportunities with EMDR Training Solutions. I've worked with them before and they are phenomenal, so register today. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment at a local counseling center in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based on the literature they have read and the experience in their fields, this should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. You can also text 741-741 and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting local brick and mortar businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your national or local therapy organizations such as the American Counseling Association or the American Mental Health Counselors Association, please get involved, at least pay the dues. It will help the lobbyists in our field keep us from becoming gig workers. And of course, there's the bonus of increasing mental health education around the United States and helping people understand what counseling is and promoting best practices within our profession. Until next time, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.